mother, who is ill, begs me not to throw her out of my house after discovering she won't leave anything for me in her will and has been taking advantage of my money. This is a complicated and long story to tell, but I really need to get it off my chest. I haven't had the best relationship with my mother for most of my life, and to be honest, I didn't have a great relationship with my sisters either. I wouldn't say my mother had favorites when we were growing up, but I can certainly say she was a bad mother, not just to me but to all of her children. I grew up without a father. My mother was left alone when I was about 10 years old, and my sisters were even younger. My father, who was good for nothing, abandoned us just like that, leaving us all adrift. Since then, my mother was the only authority figure at home, but instead of supporting us, she always seemed to be angry with us. She would always yell at us when we made noise while she was watching TV, so we preferred to leave the house no matter what time it was, and it didn't seem to matter to her either. One day, it was around 10 p.m., and my middle sister hadn't returned. She was about 9 years old at the time. So, we told my mom about it, and she just said she would come back, like some kind of pet that finds its way home. Eventually, she did, but it was after 11 p.m. Fortunately, nothing happened as she had stayed at a friend's house and told the friend's parents that her mother had no problem with it. But my mom didn't seem to care at all. I also remember that when I was 12, I once broke my arm playing soccer with some neighborhood friends. I came home crying, with my arm hanging at a strange angle, and instead of taking me to the hospital right away, my mom yelled at me for being silly. It wasn't until hours later when one of the neighbors noticed and took me to the hospital himself. That was my mom. Instead of worrying, she got angry. And don't even get me started on my sisters, who seemed to have their own drama with her. Time passed, and although it was never easy, I managed to move forward. Life at home was a constant chaos, with my mother always complaining about everything and my sisters getting into trouble. From a young age, I focused on sports. They were my escape, my way of freeing myself from the suffocating atmosphere at home. Thanks to that, I earned a sports scholarship and was able to go to college with everything paid for. To be honest, I was never too good academically, at least not as good as I was at sports, but when I realized I didn't have what it took to go pro, I decided to focus on my studies. In the end, I got a good degree and a stable future. When I went to college, I started having less contact with my mother. She would call me from time to time, but it was never to ask how I was or to show any interest in my life. Her calls were only to complain about my sisters, that one had gotten into trouble, that the other was acting out. She never asked how I was doing or if I was okay. It seemed like I only existed when she needed to vent. Eventually, I just stopped answering her calls and focused on my life. A few years passed, and eventually, I reconnected with my mother. It wasn't anything big or deep, but at least we were back in some kind of contact. We didn't see each other often, but at least we would greet each other for birthdays or holidays. It wasn't a normal relationship, but it was what it was. Things continued this way until this year, when my mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and she was in an advanced stage. I wasn't surprised at all, since my mother had been a heavy smoker her entire life. Even now, despite her doctor warning her that quitting smoking could slightly improve her condition, she refuses to do so. Before her diagnosis, she lived in her own house in another state. She had her space, her life, but once she was diagnosed, my younger sister moved back in with her to help her, or at least, that's the excuse she gave. However, what really happened was that my sister, instead of taking care of her, practically pushed her out of her own house. First, she took her room, then started moving her things, and before my mother realized it, she no longer had space even for herself in her own home. When I found out about this, I decided to step in. Although I don't have children, I live with my wife, and we have a house with enough space, including a guest room on the ground floor that is perfect for my mother. I knew my sisters wouldn't do anything for her. My younger sister, the one who threw her out, helped at first with some bills, but only did so to secure my mother's property. My other sister didn't even offer to help. She hasn't visited or called to ask how she's doing. With the situation so clear, I agreed to have my mother move in with me. I always thought my mother was poor. I never saw her spend money on anything. No trips, no cars, no luxuries. I thought she was living paycheck to paycheck. However, when I recently reviewed her finances, I discovered she has $400,000 saved. This surprised me because while I'm spending my savings to cover her medical expenses, paying for a caregiver while I'm at work, and dealing with everything that comes with having a gravely ill person in the house, she has that amount saved, which would be a huge relief. It's not that I mind taking care of my mother, at least, not entirely. But what really frustrates me is that, with all that money saved, she hasn't offered a single cent to help with her own expenses. The only good thing I can say about her is that she hasn't been mean to my wife, which I suppose is positive considering she hasn't been the best mother to me. But here's where things become truly unbearable. I recently discovered that I'm not included in her will. In fact, the only mention of me in her will is to make it clear that I will receive nothing. Her savings, her house, everything will be divided between my two sisters. I, the one who has been caring for her during this time, the one who has spent my own money to make sure she's comfortable in her final months, won't receive a cent. My sisters, on the other hand, will get everything. We're talking about the same sister who kicked her out of her own house and used $1,500 from my mother's credit card to buy things for herself, but also the other sister, who hasn't even bothered to visit her since she got sick. It's true that I have a good job, unlike my sisters, but even so, I've had to start using my savings for expenses. With all of this, I decided to confront my mother. I asked her why she thought it was fair to leave me out of her will when I've been the only one here for her. Her response was simple. She thought I wouldn't mind because I have money and my sisters don't. Really? Is that what she thinks of me? That because I have a good job and have managed my life well, I deserve less than my sisters, who haven't even lifted a finger to help her? After that conversation, I made a decision. I told her she had a week to move out of my house. She can go live with one of her daughters, or she can use her money to find somewhere to stay. She was shocked and told me she couldn't do that she was too frail to travel, and that she only has a few months left to live. She said she didn't want to use her money, preferring to keep saving it for my sisters. Honestly, I don't understand it. Why does she want to keep saving that money when she could use it to help herself now? Especially when my sisters haven't been good to her either. I just sent a message to my sisters minutes ago, letting them know they have 1 week to come get her, or I'll let the authorities handle the situation. Most likely, they'll take her to a public hospital. I know this sounds harsh, but I truly believe that if the roles were reversed, my mother wouldn't hesitate to leave me out in the cold. So, am I the bad one for kicking out my dying mother, who left me out of her inheritance, when I'm the only one caring for her? Update 1. First of all, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment and share their perspective, especially those who told me I'm not the bad guy in this situation, because honestly, I needed to hear that. These have been tough days, and even though I know my mother is on her deathbed, I can't help but feel like I don't owe her anything. Yes, she's my mother, but I can't forget all the years of neglect and mistreatment we endured. As many of you pointed out in the comments, if she really needs help, she should ask her other daughters, since they're the ones getting her inheritance. Since the initial confrontation, things have escalated more than I expected. My sisters are furious with me. As soon as they found out I gave our mother a week to leave, they didn't waste time calling and bombarding me with messages, accusing me of being cruel, insensitive, and, in so many words, the worst son in the world. But the most ironic part is that, while they're outraged at the idea of our mother ending up homeless, neither of them seems the least bit interested in actually doing anything about it. My older sister was the first to call. I barely got 2 words in before she started yelling, saying that what I was doing was inhumane, that our mother didn't deserve this, and that she couldn't believe that I, of all people, would be the one doing this. She ranted on, but despite all her anger, at no point did she mention the possibility of her taking care of our mother. When I directly asked her if she planned to do anything about it, she quickly changed the subject. Turns out she's pregnant, very pregnant, and therefore can't travel or take care of our mother. But what she didn't mention is that she has a perfectly capable husband, and that's exactly what I told her. If she can't travel, her husband can come get our mother and take her to their place. At that point, she went silent. My younger sister, on the other hand, wasn't any more reasonable. She called just a few minutes after the conversation with the older one. She was just as outraged and, at first, tried to make me feel guilty. She said Mom had nowhere to go, that she was too sick to move, and that I was being selfish by only thinking about myself and my comfort. Unlike our older sister, she doesn't have the excuse of pregnancy, but she did say she doesn't have enough space in her house for our mother. And that's when I couldn't hold back. I reminded her that the house she's living in, the one she claims doesn't have room for our mother, is actually our mother's house. If she really cared about Mom not having a place to stay, the logical thing would be to give her back her house and for my sister to move somewhere else. But of course, she had no intention of doing that. She got incredibly offended and ended the call with, "Do what you want, but this isn't over." In summary, my sisters are full of indignation and accusations toward me, but when it comes time to take action, neither of them is willing to do anything concrete for our mother. It's easy to throw words from a distance, but when it comes to taking responsibility, both of them find an excuse to vanish. As for my mother, she's still refusing to change her will. I've tried to have a serious conversation with her, explaining that it doesn't make sense for her to keep saving that money just to give it to two people who haven't been there for her. I told her that, while I'm not expecting her to leave me all her money, she could at least contribute to the expenses I'm covering. I'm not asking her to support me or pay for everything, but her situation isn't cheap. I'm paying for a caregiver, for her medication, and for her food. I'm dedicating time and money to make sure she's comfortable, while my sisters don't even bother to come see her. My mother doesn't seem to understand how unfair this all is. Or maybe she does, and she just doesn't care. When I directly asked her why she didn't include me in her will, she gave me the same excuse as always: you have money, they don't. As if the fact that I've worked hard means I don't need recognition or support from her. It seems like, in her mind, because my sisters are less financially successful, they deserve all the money, regardless of how little they've done for her. I've tried reasoning with her. I explained that it's not just about the money, but about fairness. I told her that she could at least use part of her savings to cover the costs we're incurring for her care, but she refuses. She insists that she wants to leave that money for my sisters, as if that's her only responsibility in life. What she doesn't understand is that I'm also her child, and although I've never expected anything from her, it hurts to see how she prioritizes the people who've abandoned her. My wife has been a great support throughout this. Even though she hasn't wanted to get too involved in the family dynamics, she understands it's something I need to resolve on my own. She's always been by my side, reminding me that I'm not a bad person for wanting what's fair. And to be honest, I'm starting to believe the only reason my mother hasn't been horrible to her is because she needs to have someone on her side. It's like she knows that if she turns on my wife, she won't have anyone left to rely on. I've read many of the comments from my original post, and most people agree that I'm not the bad guy here. Many of you pointed out that if my mother wants to keep saving money for my sisters, then she should go live with them. I'm starting to think that's the only solution that makes sense. I'm not a bank or a charity. I'm willing to help, but not under these circumstances. Not when I'm the only one sacrificing everything while the others sit back and wait for their share of the inheritance. At this point, it's no longer just about the money. It's about the lack of respect, the lack of reciprocity, the way I've always been seen as the one who doesn't need anything simply because I managed to make it on my own. It's not fair that my mother expects me to keep doing everything without getting anything in return. It's not fair that my sisters get everything while I shoulder the responsibility and the expenses. So yes, I'm sticking to my decision. I've given my sisters a week to come get our mother. If they don't, I'll have no choice but to let the authorities handle it. And I know it sounds harsh, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep letting myself be taken for a fool. My mother has made her choices, and now she has to live with them. If she truly believes her daughters deserve everything she has, then they should go take care of her. It's no longer my responsibility. I don't know what will happen in the next few days, but one thing is certain. I'm no longer willing to carry this burden alone. Update 2. I'm back to update you all on what's happened since my mother finally left my house. Surprisingly, it was my pregnant sister who ended up coming to get her. Turns out, she wasn't as incapable of traveling as she had claimed. What really stood out to me was that as soon as she realized how much money she'd be inheriting once our mother passed, she suddenly found the motivation and energy to come pick her up. When she arrived at my house, her face was the picture of satisfaction, like she had just won the jackpot. I can't quite explain it, but it felt like she had been waiting for this moment to secure her reward and make sure everything would go her way once our mother passed. Her expression was so obvious that I didn't even need to ask if she knew exactly what was going on. It was clear that she knew perfectly well what was waiting for her. My mother, on the other hand, didn't seem so happy with the situation. In fact, she looked resigned. There was no joy in her eyes, not even a sense of relief at going to live with one of her daughters, as I had expected. Even before getting into the car, she made one last attempt to stay at my house. She looked at me and said, "Are you sure I can't stay here a little longer?" I could hear a pleading tone in her voice, something I hadn't heard in a long time. But for me, it was too late. Don't get me wrong, I'm not heartless. My intention was never to throw her out for no reason. But at that moment, after everything we had argued about and everything that had happened, I felt like there was no turning back. So I asked her, trying to be reasonable, "Would you be willing to contribute something?" I knew the answer before she even opened her mouth, but I thought maybe, just maybe, my mother had reconsidered her stance. But no. As expected, she told me no. She had no intention of spending a single cent of her money, not even to help cover the expenses I'd been handling all this time. I don't know if it was pride, stubbornness, or if she really believed that it was more important to hold on to every penny to give to my sisters, but what was clear was that she wasn't going to budge. At that moment, I simply nodded and helped load her things into my sister's car. For me, this was never about the money. My goal in taking care of her wasn't to get something in return. If I had really wanted to play for some gain, I would have played my cards differently from the beginning. What truly bothered me, and what I couldn't ignore, was the feeling that I was being taken advantage of by my own mother. She had the money to pay for her medical care, to hire someone to look after her, or at the very least to help me with the expenses while she stayed under my roof. I didn't ask her to give me her entire inheritance or to change her will. I just wanted fairness, for her to acknowledge that I was making a sacrifice for her. But until the very end, my mother chose to hold on to her money for my sisters without caring about what I had been doing for her. She knew perfectly well that I wouldn't receive anything, and while that hurt, it wasn't the main issue. What really affected me was her insistence that her money shouldn't be used for anything related to me. Still, I could see in her face that she wasn't thrilled about going to live with my sister, much less about leaving the comfort of my home. My sister, on the other hand, was already counting down the days until she got her reward, clearly more concerned about the money than our mother's condition. I know a lot of people might think I was too harsh, that I should have let my mother stay until the end, but honestly, I believe I did what was right for my own mental health and for my family. I couldn't continue bearing the pressure of being the only one caring for her, while my sisters didn't lift a finger and just waited for their share of the inheritance. My savings were dwindling, and I wasn't going to get a promotion anytime soon. As for my sisters, I doubt this situation will improve our relationship. Since my mother left, I haven't heard from them, which doesn't surprise me at all. Once my mother passes away, I'm sure they'll be too busy arguing over who gets which part of the inheritance to worry about me. At the end of the day, I think this whole ordeal has taught me an important lesson about family boundaries. There's a point where you have to stop and ask yourself if it's worth continuing to sacrifice for people who aren't willing to do the same for you. In my case, that moment came when I realized that, while I could care for my mother, I wasn't obligated to do so under her unfair conditions. Update 3. It's been 7 months since my mother left my house, and I'm here because I've just learned that she passed away. The strange part is that it wasn't any of my sisters who told me the news. I found out through third parties, people who aren't even part of my immediate family. Neither of my sisters bothered to contact me, not to inform me of our mother's death, nor to discuss what happens next, but honestly, it hasn't bothered me much. I know it sounds cold, but the truth is, my mother was so horrible to me for so long that when I heard about her death, all I felt was a kind of indifference. There's no sadness, no relief, just an acceptance of what was already inevitable. Although I once said that I didn't think my mother had favorites when we were kids, now I'm not so sure. Maybe I didn't see it when I was young, but as I got older, it became clear that my sisters were the ones who always received most of her attention, at least when it came to things that really mattered, like money and important decisions. I don't know exactly what my sisters inherited, and honestly, I don't care. I have no desire to get involved in that circus, and the last thing I want is to fight over something that was never meant to be mine. No one has called me, no lawyer has contacted me, which only confirms what I already knew. In the end, I haven't received anything, and that's fine. I didn't expect anything, and I don't want anything that doesn't come with respect or appreciation. The money isn't really what matters to me in this case. I work hard, and I know I can always earn more through honest effort and dedication. The money my mother left my sisters, on the other hand, will probably be gone very quickly. They've lived in poverty their whole lives, not for lack of opportunity, but because they've always been more concerned with spending than saving or investing wisely. I can already imagine how they feel right now, thinking they've won something. But time will show that everything they've received will disappear just as quickly as it came. It's sad, really. My sisters and I could have had a stronger relationship. We could have shared responsibilities and been closer as a family. But instead, everything became about the inheritance, about who got more, who kept what, and I don't want to be a part of that. Life has taught me that the most valuable things aren't the ones you're given, but the ones you build for yourself. And that's what I'll continue doing. In the end, I hold no resentment. I've learned to accept that life is what it is, and you can't always change what's already been done. My sisters have what they've always wanted, and I have the peace of knowing that I didn't depend on that inheritance to move forward. To me, that's worth more than any amount of money.